Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this second panel. This panel will be about strategy, execution, and AI. Well, you probably have heard and experimented yourself AIs for the last couple of years. It became a buzzword, it's everywhere. And of course, in strategy, execution, and OKRs too. We've experimented it, we've tried it, and so on. But what's behind it? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? And this is something that I was very curious about. And I had the chance through the collective to connect with people who did dive into this question. So I'm more than happy to welcome four world-class strategy execution and OKR experts that do have a special feeling and opinion about how to leverage AI for strategy execution. Let me welcome Natalie, Peter, Christian, and Harry. Welcome everyone to this panel. And so Peter, based in UK, working worldwide, has a long experience with OKR and strategy execution, working with boards. Natalie from the US and now based in the Middle East has been working with a lot of the Fortune 500 companies, helping them with OKRs. Christian, coming from the Silicon Valley and with his tech-oriented approach to everything he does, brings a lot of in-depth knowledge around AI. And we have Harry with former experience of chief of staff and leading operational and transformational role, as a very interesting approach on how to basically have an operational, pragmatical approach to strategy execution through workshops and sprints. So welcome everyone. I'm going to kick off this panel with a general question, which is basically AI arrived. We sooner or later got into it. But now, in the present, how has AI impacted the way you work? What are the main benefits you found? And I'm going to maybe start with Natalie, ladies first, for this question. But I'm curious to hear all of you about that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here on this panel. Gosh, I have shifted my feeling about AI and using it daily, just even in the last few months. And I reach for it probably 9 times out of 10 before I go to Google. So it's interesting that I'm using it in my everyday and with my clients. I think where it comes in handy in defining strategy is when I need to learn about a business I may not know a lot about, and I need to look up some information. So yeah, I'm reaching for it every day, all day.
Great. How about you, Harry?
Yeah, well, I think for me specifically, I've decided to go as a sort of solopreneur recently. So I've had to start running my own business, which means learning all the facets that I've never been involved in before, even as a chief of staff previously. So I think allowing me to, similar to Natalie, kind of learn new things a lot faster, and ultimately be able to delegate tasks that usually would take me a long time to a system that can allow me to think more strategically for myself. So.
Interesting. Interesting. Peter, how about you?
I think that started off, it was a great productivity hack. It was a way of getting things incredibly quickly, I think, and then you start developing the skills around using prompts in a different way. I, like Natalie, have probably shifted now where it's a much more significant part of my working day. But for me, really, I think if you do have that entrepreneurial mindset, that's sort of working for yourself, it isn't about presenteeism. It's about getting stuff done. It's about outcomes. And that's where I think there's an interesting gray line between people getting very busy to produce a lot of stuff in AI, but actually not being focused on the outcomes. Or one of the slightly more cruel comparisons I made, it's sometimes when I see reports coming in that are AI driven, it's a bit like going to a restaurant and getting terrible food, but getting a lot of it.
Yeah, you see a lot of people launching AI projects, but there is no clear problem they want to solve or outcome thereafter. I think that's good to remind ourselves that, well, we implement things to solve a problem. How about you, Christian, to close the loop, or the first loop at least?
Yeah, absolutely. I use it all the time. Have been doing so for a couple of years. I'm basically a cyborg at this point. And yeah, I mean, I would echo what everybody else says. I think one of the things that was very clear to me early on with generative AI is that it dovetails very nicely with OKRs. So if you think of OKRs as kind of a social technology, and AI is sort of, you know, the latest discontinuous change when it comes to information technology, they can be both used together, very potent combination to accelerate learning, right? So you're doing new things, you're running experiments much faster, you're unsticking information from reality in some sense, right? Ideally towards some end. You know, in the private sector would be to create customers, and the public sector would be to pursue some particular mission. And as you do new things, you're unsticking that info. And you know, pre-AI, it would have been very difficult to make sense of it without hiring lots of people, which is why we've seen such an explosion of knowledge work, right, in the 20th century. But now you can start to delegate some of that information processing to computers, because they can crunch words where they could only crunch numbers before. And so once you start using this, I think in a very prudent way, not to create, you know, slop, right, but actually to accelerate learning and figure out how to do new things, that's kind of, you know, what I've found it to be the most useful for, and other folks obviously are figuring that out as well.
Yeah, you know, you use the term information processing, and I remember reading that now in 1 second we actually access in information the amount of the total worldwide books from the Middle Age or something like that, or for the 20th century. And I think the first digital revolution was information access, and AI is indeed information processing and even action based on that. That's where we go, right? And I remember when we had one conversation, and I realized actually I'm not gonna have to type in the future. I'm just gonna have to talk. That's gonna be enough, you know. And I realized it was really close. It's not far. It's here. Maybe let's go and now zoom in into the strategy execution and OKRs world, and we can continue with you, Christian. Where do you see the most powerful ways? And maybe you can mention one or two max, so that everyone can share some thoughts on how to use AI for strategy execution in OKRs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you two concrete examples. I found AI, in terms of how it fits in with a rigorous, focused OKR process, to be useful when it comes to information acquisition on the front end. So let's say before you've set a goal for the quarter, right? And sometimes during the weekly sync, as you're kind of generating new data you need to make sense of. One of my favorite things to do is to spin up a voice agent, right? So traditionally, let's say you wanted to collect information from the entire organization, you would have had to use a form. You would have had to rely on, you know, many levels of management to filter up the right information. And I don't think necessarily those are completely obviated, but you do have this new tool that you can use to get a direct line, let's say from the C-suite to the people who are on the front lines with customers who are, you know, getting that most valuable information in the form of a voice agent that's behind a phone number that can ask really good questions. A form can't do that. Traditional survey can't do that. And so you can spin these things up at scale, collect enormous amounts of really valuable data about what is actually going on. And that kind of grounded information, you can then analyze it, make sense of it using AI as well, is going to lead to significantly better goals, right? Because you're more grounded in what is the case, not just in terms of the data you're collecting through financial metrics and so on and so forth, or product analytics, but also what's in people's heads, which is really, really important and would have been prohibitively expensive to do before. So that's one. And then during the course of the OKR process, you're constantly pushed to do new things that you might not have the capacity to do, because you figured out there's an opportunity or a risk that you need to deal with like quickly to get a strategic edge. And so one of my favorite things to do is to take a bunch of requirements in plain speech, recorded through a meeting transcript, dictation, whatever, and then turn it into working code. You know, you can spin up a product so fast, or at least a prototype, and then test it with users to figure out, does this meet the need? Is this something that we can turn into a revenue generating, product, or perhaps AI enhanced service line or something like that? And you can do it immediately. You don't need very long planning processes. So those would be two examples.
Nice, thanks. Let's see what the others are thinking. Does someone want to jump in and share one or two powerful ways that they've seen working for them?
Quick hits. Modeling. using it for modeling, which is great. So anything around process reengineering, operational efficiencies, I'm using it in those ways, and it's very powerful to not have to create it from scratch.
Yeah, and if I recall well, you're now implementing OKRs in a large AI department. So I guess you have a lot of technical knowledge around you to support where needed.
Yeah.
Nice.
Given where I am, data is the new black gold. Yeah. So being
Yeah.
able to look back over 100 years worth of oil and gas data is a very powerful thing.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
For me, as an
Peter,
OKR
you
coach,
want to jump in?
yeah, sure. What I think I use it wrongly to start with. I think sometimes you are looking to polish and nuance language as opposed to get to buy-in and ownership. So I tend to use it a slightly different way now. I think so. Again, in the spirit of giving two things, I like it to come up with problem statements, and I find putting the AI in the room with a PC or a Mac and actually participating in the OKR workshop is really powerful. But I do always try and push towards finding what the problem is, particularly at team level OKRs, maybe not so much the higher level of strategy. And the other bit, which I think is invaluable and has got to be used for accelerating, which has always been a struggle for anybody that's been in an OKR coaching environment, key results. It is just such a great way to get yourself some real good metrics and data, and then have a mechanism to say, can we access this data? How often is it updated? Who owns it? And get really into the meat of what an OKR coach does. So those are my two things. Accelerate the process to get some meaningful key results, but actually use it as a to challenge your assumptions and ask some difficult questions.
Very nice. Love it. It's great. Thanks, Peter. Harry?
Yeah, I think on the sort of opposite end of what Christian was saying about like inputs, I've also thought about like the other struggle with strategy execution, which is like the communication side to the rest of the organization. I actually think Christian and I were going back and forth in a different call like a few months ago of this. I think it was inspired by this article that was like, how do you motivate different generations in your workforce? And, you know, we think of strategy coming out in one document in one way, and we hope everyone in the organization gets it. But because of the new ways that you can use AI to generate different styles of content in different voices and tone and different, you know, ways in which people want to receive that information, you can now do that far more easily while still being very authentic with the problem that it's solving and keeping everyone on the same page to keep people aligned, have them ask the right questions in the right form. So I think it's almost like the output of, right, here's our goals and our OKRs. You can almost change how you communicate that for different teams, different levels, different demographics of your organization with AI in minutes rather than going through layers of communication channels there. So
Yeah, that's amazing. So we talked about opportunities, and I think the audience now got quite a few great ideas to experiment. Let's talk about risks as well, right? So we've seen here a question popping in, and that's something we discussed as well around data privacy. So maybe Natalie, you can take this point because I know it's close to your heart. How about data privacy?
Yeah, so I have a funny saying, you know what's funny about safety? Nothing. And I'll tell you, what we're putting into our AI tools and asking it questions, you have to be really careful that, you know, it's constantly learning. And so if it's private information, especially, you know, in the US, HIPAA related health data, really make sure that you're using a private AI. Because if it's public, it's public. It's taking your information and it's learning from it. And so be wary for your personal data as well as your client's data. So it's just a caution. I think everybody should be careful about using AI too much, and especially in health field. That's one of the areas where I'm seeing healthcare is nervous about HIPAA violations in the US.
Yeah, I have actually no later than yesterday. I was at a large international organization that are regulated, and basically, you know, this thing where you put a presentation on ChatGPT and you ask them to review the content or the copywriting and so on. and basically people, before they restricted it, were sharing very confidential presentation. And when a few months later they went and asked, then the information was available while it was secret and nobody should know it. So ChatGPT would swallow it and bring it back to the world.
That's
So
right.
quite fair. Yeah. There is another question, and it's also another risk, is how do you avoid losing the human intuition? Because there is a human process around OKRs. I don't know if one of you want to tackle this risk.
Harry, you go first, because I think we're both on the same page here, but I'll let you go first, and I think I'll probably follow in with an echo.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's I think if you look at AI as a generator of content, you might end up not getting exactly what you want. You actually spend more time crafting something through AI than it would have taken you if you just use your own human intuition. But I think it's a very valuable partner if you give it some framework to think through of what you're doing. So, for example, if you are writing an OKR, as long as you're giving context and content and giving some first step of a path in which you're thinking, it can help refine and challenge assumptions that you're maybe working through. So you still get that intuition there. I kind of think of it as either like a confidence builder or an accelerator to an idea you're trying to get to. So I think it's very much, you have to go hand in hand rather than just generate my OKRs for me. I think that's we've probably all learned that already, but the more of a structure you give it, the more of this is the goal that I'm trying to exceed. Can you at least help me refine my thinking here? That's where I think some of this, especially in the OKR setting, I think that's probably the first use case that most thought of was, oh, we can auto generate OKRs. I think we quickly learned that there needs to be a little bit more of a handhold to it. But yeah, I think it's, as long as it's carefully structured and it has a goal that you're trying to achieve and you've given it the context, I think it's can be useful in that way. So
I'll be a bit more direct than that. My concern is that if you don't get the mindset right of why people are doing OKRs in the first place, and as you align it more into the organization, and they see setting OKRs as a task, then they just use the AI to get something off their desk. So they don't feel any ownership for it. They don't feel any commitment to it. So I think it's a real point around, I think it's probably more generally around AI anyway. This is about leadership. You as leaders within the organization have got to decide how you are going to use it, because otherwise you end up with shadow AI. I remember years ago going into many organizations, big enterprise, and it was shadow apps created in Excel, where people had extracted data out, started playing around with it. I mean, we even had cases where people were influencing the LIBOR rate in the UK and then the banking rates, all through shadow apps. And I think shadow AI is a real danger in organizations where people have maybe got a policy, but they just dive in and use their phone anyway. Because at $20 a month, who cares? So I think the human element is massive here, and it's down to leaders to get a hold of it.
Yeah, I think like I'm gonna interpret what I hear, but I think there is a part which is, well, this is a tool that can accompany a process where the human needs to be on top and in control and needs to be at the impulsion and at the closing. And in the middle, it can come as a support to accelerate, enhance, challenge. And this is necessary because if not, we fall in the pitfall which a lot of organizations can fall into also without AI, which is to use OKRs for reporting purposes. And then in the end, basically, you're just having a report and people don't know why they report on it and they do it for the manager, and then you lose the whole purpose. And yeah, thanks to share on that. So obviously, I think every week there is a new tool, and last year it was O3, and then O4, and then now we have DeepSeek. So like there are many stuff, and I'm curious to hear, what are your favorite tools? What do you recommend to use when it comes to OKRs? What do you use yourself? Maybe we can do a quick roundtable around that, and maybe we can close with Christian, because he will complete anything that we would not have, as I think he has a dedicated computer just for all the tools he uses. Who wants to get started?
I'll throw mine out. It's easy. It's Claude. I use Claude first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Notebook LM for me. Notebook LM through. I love it. It's been to keep
Notebook
things.
LM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll steal one that
Aaron?
Christian Christian gave me this one before, Super Whisper, for voice transcriptions, of just being able to annotate what I'm saying and be able to craft it a little bit better than what your typical voice notes would do. So
Nice. So Christian, what else can you tell us?
Man, I'm going to see if I can thread a few needles at the same time with this one, because I think the last sort of little bit of the conversation was super interesting about privacy, information security, and sort of the dynamic nature of the space. I think I've come to a couple conclusions that I think are really uncomfortable, especially for enterprises. I have a lot of conviction about. One is that you should assume that the shelf life on secrets is going to be extremely short going forward. You can do certain things. You want to make sure you're complying with the law. You have sound corporate policy and all these things, but that just is what it is. So private knowledge turns into common knowledge a lot faster. Two, I think that when it comes to this tension between centralized IT and then people who are using the technology to innovate, leaders should absolutely get ahead of this and try to decentralize IT. IT should not be a bottleneck. It's a support function that helps make the people who are really going above and beyond for customers and using all these tools as they come to exist to innovate, to do new things, to become more efficient and more effective. There's obviously an optimal balance between these things, but I'm seeing this tension in a lot of places, and I think it's something that deserves a little bit more thought, especially if you're thinking about reforming the organization in light of what AI does. So to answer your question about one of my favorite things to do, I am a huge fan of O1 Pro. I think that it is by far the most powerful model that you can use right now. And one of the best use cases for a powerful model is to ask the machine to ask you questions. So if you want to elevate the quality of your goals and the quality of sort of your thinking and the actions that you're going to take, given that you have limited attention, one of my favorite things to do is every week I take all of my meeting transcripts, and as much as I can fit into O1 Pro, which has, I think, about a 200,000 token context window, pop it in, and I ask two questions. One is, what's the most important thing that nobody in any of these meetings is paying attention to? Always interesting answers out of that. And the second is, can you ask me 3 super hard-hitting questions that, if sufficiently addressed, would allow me to serve my clients better? And then I'll just go for a walk, record a monologue, and then try to make sense of it. And I found that having a really good thought partner who can ask you those hard questions in the form of the most powerful model on the market, that's good for everybody. So I would highly recommend trying that out.
Nice. And so coming back on the tools, do you have, like, we heard about Claude, about Notebook LM, we heard about Super Whisper. Do you have, like, what's the latest tools that you've discovered or recommend?
Yeah, I mean, in that particular case, using O1 Pro, O3 Pro is going to be coming out at some point soon. That's super accessible to consumers. They're starting to release the agentic capabilities in terms of operator and things like that, and the deep research, which I think is worth checking out. I mean, the other thing, this is a little bit more esoteric or technical, but the model context protocol from Anthropic, I think, is really worth taking a look at.
Claude is also Anthropic, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Claude is Anthropic, exactly.
Yeah.
And their MCP server spec, I think that it's quite possible that will be the architecture of what the app economy was to the iPhone. The MCP spec and MCP servers may be to this next generation of kind of AI native products, whatever the labs come out with. So I think if you want to get ahead of the curve on that, think about how to build tools for agents rather than products for people. You should go investigate.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Christian, and thank everyone for sharing your recommendations here. There is one question that came up, and I think that's a very interesting and valuable one. Let's say now we want to get started with AI and OKRs, or AI and strategy execution. What would be the steps you would recommend? And maybe we can ask Harry to get started with this question.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, I was able to lead our AI task force at my last company, which Peter is actually at, so he knows the full experience of me leading that. A lot of it was I think the first thing was dedicating a set of resources to focus on this project. This isn't something that typically one team owns. There's a lot of ownership there, but I think one of the biggest steps that maybe we jumped out of the gate building too many small projects was not understanding that this is as much of a change management program as much as it is a technology solution. So making sure that you are creating an environment that allows people to learn, allows people to collaborate together. We created an ambassador program. I actually think Peter might have been an ambassador in that program, where we came together on like a weekly basis, figured out what problems were happening across teams, and then actually had teams set OKRs on overcoming those problems with AI. And we would check in on a weekly basis and see what the progress was. And we'd kind of highlight those efforts as like really strong wins for the organization. So we did like dedicated AI all hands that showed how these projects were making an impact, but most importantly, to the goals we cared about most. And so I think that kind of started this at least greater level of comfort of bringing AI into the fold of the work we do. And then, as what Christian was saying before, and what we've kind of alluded to, is if you can point it in the right direction, which is at the objectives you set, you kind of set these guardrails up on what matters most and where the effort should go. So I think first, like, lay the foundation of allowing for experimentation. Obviously, there's the data and privacy controls that we've kind of mentioned here, making sure you have those in place, but without kind of either letting everyone run free or without giving them direction and allowing them to kind of build together. I think that's what worked for us pretty well over the first year or so.
Super nice. And that's interesting that it's not only the view from a coach consultant that help an organization, but also from you as someone who led it within an organization. So thanks for sharing it, Harry. Peter, do you want to share some additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, connecting, and you're right, Harry. I did do a little bit on that ambassador program, although I did feel a bit of imposter syndrome because I just came from a point of curiosity as opposed to expertise. But I think the key thing in that program, and in any organization from a cultural point of view, is sharing. You know, if you find something that works really well for you, don't protect it. You've got to give it out to others. I'll give a simple example. We had a client out in Abu Dhabi. I had time pressures. We'd done many workshops. I'd taken many pictures of Post-it notes, whiteboards. Just by speaking my notes into Word and then anonymizing so nobody knew who the client was, I accelerated the ability for us to hit some deadlines in terms of their senior people in order to coalesce. And I just shared that with, I said, because some people are much better at talking than they are writing, right? So just stick Word into dictation mode and talk into it, and then tidy up your thinking later on. So it was simple things like the culture is sharing. You know, as an organization, you've got to learn the AI together, mistakes, share them, and get them out. I think that's the big part, rather than using it some way of making yourself look smart.
Creating a culture of experiment and sharing, like a community of practice. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Christian, Natalie, one of you want to jump in as we wrap it up soon?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've kind of a methodology for like accelerated AI adoption, and the sort of second phase, once you have people who have developed competency, they can sort of go 10 times faster by cobbling together the general purpose tools, is really going from shadow IT to show and tell, right? So shadow IT is going on. It sort of is what it is. You got to implement sound corporate policy, make it easy for people to make good decisions. And as people are doing kind of this user-led innovation with what they have, making sure it doesn't stay stuck like in their heads or in their sort of particular sphere of influence, and encouraging folks, all you have to do is implement like a weekly show and tell session, right? And give people the opportunity to, have higher visibility in the organization, some more status, could be financial compensation, whatever the case is, but really unsticking that know-how by having them tell the story of how they did what they did and setting kind of a positive example, being a role model for peers. Very simple process to implement, super beneficial. So highly recommend figuring out how to, instead of going after shadow IT, encouraging those people to share what they know through show and tell.
Yeah. Thanks, Christian. Natalie, do you want to close the loop on this last question?
Yeah, and I'm in a unique position in that, and this is public information, but Aramco has its own AI tool. And so given that I was brought in to implement the OKR program with Aramco AI, it's a very unique role in that I have built in AI with the client, which I'm seeing some clients building in their own AI to their tools. The benefit there, of course, is it's always available. And then the detriment is that it's always available. But it is quite handy to be able to work with the very people who made it and talk about strategy and execution with them as my colleagues.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you, everyone. We are wrapping up now. People are sharing in the chat that they found it very insightful. I personally enjoyed very much that conversation. I think there are a lot of valuable insights. We'll probably find a way to share these takeaways as well after the event. Now I will invite everyone to actually join the next session, which I will run. Actually, this will be the closing keynote before we present the OKR Awards. We'll talk about strategy execution. So you just jump out of here and jump in the next session. It's going to be short, 15 minutes. And then we celebrate OKR Awards of 2025. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Christian, Farry, and Peter.